Hello, everyone. For my final project, I'll be discussing how LGBTQ people have been represented in film and television over time, and how those portrayals reflect changing social attitudes in American culture. My main argument is that although LGBTQ people originally had little to no representation in media, and were often portrayed as dangerous, immoral, mentally unstable, or comedic stereotypes, representation has gradually evolved into more realistic and human portrayals of LGBTQ experiences. I'll be examining this evolution decade by decade, using examples from movies and television to show how media both reflected and influenced public attitudes toward LGBTQ people. Some examples include outdated stereotypes, homophobia, and transphobia that may be uncomfortable today, but they are important to understanding the history of representation in media. To understand early LGBTQ representation, we first need to understand the Hays Code. The Hays Code was a Hollywood censorship system used from the 1930s through the 1960s. It banned anything considered sexual perversion, which included homosexuality. Because of this, filmmakers could not openly portray LGBTQ characters positively or directly.
Well, who are you?
I don't know. I'm not quite myself today.
Well, you look perfectly idiotic in those clothes.
These aren't my clothes.
Well, where are your clothes?
I've lost my clothes.
Well, why are you wearing these clothes?
Because I just went gay all of a sudden.
Directly. Instead, queer characters were coded through stereotypes. One common stereotype was the pansy character. These were flamboyant, feminine men used as comic relief. Their purpose was usually to make audiences laugh or feel uncomfortable. They were not treated seriously and rarely had emotional depth. Another stereotype was the queer villain. Filmmakers often implied that villains were queer through mannerisms, fashion, or behavior. This connected homosexuality with danger and immorality. A strong example is Goldfinger from the James Bond series. The character Pussy Galore is heavily implied to be lesbian. She is independent, masculine, and uninterested in men. However, by the end of the film, James Bond seduces her, and she suddenly becomes heterosexual. The film suggests that lesbianism is temporary or can be fixed by the right man, reflecting social attitudes of the time. Another example is The Gay Deceivers from 1969. The film follows two straight men pretending to be gay to avoid the Vietnam draft. Most of the humor comes from the audience seeing homosexuality as embarrassing or ridiculous. Gay identity becomes the joke itself, rather than a real experience. These portrayals reinforce the idea that LGBTQ people were abnormal, dangerous, or laughable. The 1970s marked a major turning point after the 1969 Stonewall riots, which helped launch the modern gay rights movement. The Hays Code ended, and filmmakers gained more freedom to portray LGBTQ characters openly. Representation increased, but it was still limited and often shaped by stereotypes. One important example is The Boys in the Band. The film focuses entirely on a group of gay men at a birthday party. This was groundbreaking because gay men were finally shown openly discussing their lives and relationships. However, many characters are deeply insecure, lonely, and self-hating. The movie reflects how years of discrimination affected queer identity. Another major example is the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Dr. Frankenfurter is openly queer, gender nonconforming, and sexually expressive. The film challenged traditional ideas about gender and sexuality in ways that mainstream media rarely had before. While some audiences viewed it as shocking, many LGBTQ viewers embraced it as a celebration of self-expression and identity. Even though representation was improving, lesbian and transgender representation remained very limited during the decade. The 1980s were heavily shaped by the AIDS epidemic, which dramatically affected LGBTQ representation. Because AIDS disproportionately impacted gay men, many people falsely labeled it a gay disease. This increased fear, discrimination, and stigma against the LGBTQ community. As a result, media portrayals became more tragic and emotional. Gay characters were often shown as isolated, suffering, or dying, rather than villainous. At the same time, there was widespread misunderstanding of transgender people. A clear example appears in Crocodile Dundee. In one scene, Dundee publicly exposes a transgender woman by grabbing her body to check her sex, while other characters laugh.
She's a guy. A man dressed up as a girl. Sweat.
The scene treats transgender identity as deceptive and shocking, reinforcing transphobic attitudes common at the time. The humor surrounding emotional instability and gender confusion reflected broader discomfort with sexuality and identity during the decade. During the late 1980s, conservative political movements promoted traditional family values, creating backlash against LGBTQ+ visibility. While representation became more sympathetic than earlier decades, queer people were still often associated with sadness, suffering, or social instability. In the 1990s, LGBTQ+ characters became more common in television and film, but stereotypes still remained very strong. One major issue was using queer characters as comic relief. In Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, the reveal that a character is transgender becomes the central joke of the movie. Characters react with disgust and panic after learning the truth. The film reflects how transgender people were often portrayed as deceptive or disturbing in mainstream entertainment. In The Silence of the Lambs, Buffalo Bill is portrayed as a disturbed killer associated with femininity and gender transformation. Even though the film claims he is not transgender, many audiences connected gender nonconformity with mental instability and violence because of the portrayal. Television sitcoms also reflected changing attitudes. In Friends, Carol and Susan were one of television's most visible lesbian couples. Their relationship was treated more normally than previous portrayals, especially when they married during the show. However, many jokes still focused on Ross feeling uncomfortable or emasculated by their relationship. That 70s show included moments of queerbaiting through Fez and other characters who displayed queer-coded behavior without openly identifying as LGBTQ+. Joseph Gordon-Levitt's gay character was also limited, showing how networks were still cautious about openly queer storylines. The 1990s helped normalize LGBTQ+ visibility in mainstream television.
You're gay!
Me? No, I'm not gay.
You're not? You just kissed me.
Okay, I'm gay.
Can you take me home now?
During the 2000s, LGBTQ+ representation became more emotionally complex and humanized. Shows increasingly focused on queer relationships and identity struggles rather than using sexuality only as a joke. One groundbreaking example is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Willow and Tara's relationship became one of television's first long-term lesbian romances. Their relationship was treated seriously and emotionally, helping normalize queer relationships for mainstream audiences. However, Tara's death also reinforced the bury your gays trope, where queer characters often end in tragedy. Modern Family introduced Mitchell and Cameron, a married gay couple raising a child. Unlike earlier stereotypes, they were portrayed as loving parents with relatable family problems. Their inclusion showed how LGBTQ+ families were becoming more accepted in mainstream television. At the same time, problems remained. In Family Guy, Quagmire's transgender parent is repeatedly mocked, and the humor often relies on disgust toward transgender identity. This shows how trans representation lagged behind gay and lesbian visibility during the decade. Overall, the 2000s represented a major step toward treating LGBTQ+ people as ordinary individuals with complex emotional lives. Since around 2015, LGBTQ+ representation has become much more mainstream and multidimensional. Today, queer characters are more likely to exist naturally within stories, instead of being defined entirely by stereotypes or tragedy. In Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Captain Holt is openly gay, but his identity is only one part of his character. He is respected as intelligent, disciplined, and professional, which contrasts strongly with older flamboyant stereotypes. Euphoria includes Jules Vaughn, a transgender teenager portrayed with emotional complexity and personal agency. Her character explores identity, relationships, and insecurity without reducing her entirely to her gender identity. In Stranger Things, Will Byers' sexuality develops gradually and sympathetically. Rather than being mocked, his feelings are portrayed as part of the emotional challenges of growing up. Abbott Elementary includes Jacob Hill, whose sexuality is normalized rather than sensationalized. His character exists naturally within the workplace comedy. Modern media still faces criticism for issues like lack of diversity or corporate performative representation. But LGBTQ+ characters today are far more humanized and normalized than in earlier decades. This evolution directly connects to course concepts about representation, ideology, and media influence. Media shapes how society understands identity, gender, and sexuality. Early portrayals reinforced fear and prejudice, while modern portrayals can increase visibility and acceptance. The progression of LGBTQ+ representation also reflects larger social changes, including the gay rights movement, feminism, transgender activism, and changing cultural attitudes toward identity and equality. Representation matters because the stories people see in media influence how communities are viewed in real life.